Cruising in the depths of the world's oceans are sharks that have earned themselves a reputation as the most dangerous species of sharks, the great white sharks. They are equipped with rows of razor-sharp teeth that are unforgiving during their infamous sneak attacks. When great white sharks are looking to satisfy their large appetites, the last thing you want to do is be in their way. When these ruthless sea creatures decide to strike, they move with such precision and speed that they end up giving their victims no chance to react. Onlookers are left with no other choice than to watch in horror. Such was the case of a man named Randal Fry. A 50-year-old father of one was an ocean enthusiast who loved to spend every waking moment in the expansive oceans. So on 15th of August 2004, same as any other suitable day, Randal could not resist the urge to go to the ocean, and so, together with his longtime diving buddies Cliff Zimmerman and Red Bartley, he heeded the call, and they all set out to the Mendocino coast of abalone. Aboard the 28-foot fishing boat named Dolphin, the trio was bursting with excitement as the cool ocean breeze brushed against their bodies. They combed the turquoise ocean until they all agreed that the sheltered cove at Kybsilla Rock was the perfect spot for abalone hunting. The trio had been at this cove several times before and knew it like the palm of their hands. So, before they could set foot in the cool, alluring waters, they quickly scanned the ocean for sharks or sea lions that the great white sharks were fond of trailing. Once the coast was clear, Randal wasted no time and jumped into the waters. A few minutes later, Cliff joined him. Since abalones could only be caught through free diving in the 15-foot deep waters, all they had on was a wetsuit and mask. While Randy, as they were fond of calling him, was slowly drifting farther away from the boat, Cliff remained close by because he was having trouble with his equipment. For some reason, his mask kept fogging up. Bartley chose to stay behind and keep an eye out for any danger. While on the deck of the boat, he decided to keep himself busy. He took out his fishing rod, hooked the bait, and cast it into the water. Within no time, Bartley had landed a black rock cod before the rest could catch their first abalone. Randy was now 3 feet away from Cliff, who was trying to catch up, but was still struggling with his mask. Afloat, they chatted away and made fun as their heads were bobbing up and down with every breath that the sea took. Randy was yearning to get started with the adventure and couldn't wait a minute longer for Cliff to finish fiddling with his equipment, and so he decided to dive deeper. Not wanting to miss out on the fun, Cliff hurriedly cleaned his foggy mask off and dipped his head into the water to suction his mask onto his head. As his face broke the surface of the water, the unexpected happened. He could feel the pressure of something big passing near him. He stuck his head out of the water and looked around, hoping to see the submarine or speedboat that had just gone past him. In a horrific turn of events, Cliff's eyes were met with a large dorsal fin sticking out of the water. All he knew and needed to know was that the fish was big enough to kill. Before his screams of terror could reach Randal and warn him of the impending danger, the blue ocean suddenly turned crimson. Out of nowhere, the 18-foot great white shark grabbed Randal by his throat and tore his head off, killing him instantly. Copious amounts of blood were seen gushing to the water's surface before both the shark and Randy disappeared into the murkiness of the water. For a moment, Cliff thought that he was right in the middle of a horror movie, but the now strong waves quickly slapped him back to his senses. Cliff, who had spent a good amount of his life on this coast, had heard of many previous shark attacks, but none was fatal. And for a shark attack as fatal as Randy's to happen right before his eyes, it was unbelievable. He could not shake the feeling that a few seconds ago, that could have been him. However, he was still not yet safe from the monstrous creature. He immediately dropped his weight belt and gathered all the energy left in him and frantically made a swim for the boat. He could not tell if the shark was on to him. With his heart about to burst from his chest, he pushed himself beyond his limits, praying and hoping that his body would propel him faster than the water-dwelling monster. Luckily, Bartley was there to yank him out of the water. Bartley who had heard Cliff screaming at the top of his lungs, looked up only to see a pool of blood spreading on the water's surface. They took a moment and looked around one more time, but they could neither see the shark nor their beloved friend. The blood, too, was gone. Cliff was still trembling and could barely catch his breath. Bartley quickly reached for his radio at the same time, trying to steer the boat, and made a mayday call for help. The duo began their agonizing ride back to the sandy shore. Within the nick of time, helicopters were hovering over the cave at Kybsilla Rocks, looking for Randal's body. Sadly, their efforts were fruitless. As dusk came, the team dispersed. Bartley began his drive back home, but first he needed to make another call. He called Randy's mom and broke the news to her. The following day, in a haunting twist, while recounting their interaction with Randal, Cliff remembered that during one of their usual bunters, Randy had mentioned that a shark might get him in the future. Little did he know that the premonition would come true, and in the most horrific way possible, and that his friends would be left watching in horror. The only comfort that Randal's loved ones got was that earlier that day, a Coast Guard had recovered Randal's lifeless, headless body. Were it not for the wetsuit that had his name on it, it would have taken longer to identify him. But the horror was far from over. On September 8th, 3 weeks after the horrific incident, a beachcomber walking on 10 Mile Beach, north of Fort Bragg, found a head. Upon further investigations, it was identified by the Mendocino County authorities as belonging to Randal. Fatal shark attacks in this area were rare, and when consulted about the reasons for this one, experts strongly believe that the shark may have mistaken Randy for a seal. Others suspected that Bartley's decision to start fishing could have attracted the shark to the area. His family and friends came together to spread his ashes in Maverick's Surf near Half Moon Bay. He spent his better days in the ocean and wanted to rest near it. Many described him as a generous man whose absence would be greatly felt by his community. Randy's colleagues termed him irreplaceable, and his death remains to be a chilly reminder of the unforeseen dangers that are lurking in the alluring waters of the ocean, waiting to bite the next unsuspecting person in the water, bringing them to their tragic, final affliction.
This is a shocking reminder of the dangers faced by divers and fishermen every day. This particular shark attack took place off the coast of Vanuatu Island, the second largest island of Fiji. Known for its natural beauty, its rugged mountains and hills are covered in dense rainforest, providing a haven for a range of wildlife. Its fringes are comprised of sandy beaches, coral reefs, and the deep blue of the Pacific Ocean. Maika Tabua was a 44-year-old father of 7 from the village of Naikaki. He had been diving and fishing in the seas off the island for more than 10 years. On March 10, 2016, he stepped into the water with a group of friends never to return. The group of them were free diving for bêche de mer, otherwise known as sea cucumbers. This type of fishing is a common activity among local communities in Fiji. The echinoderms are served up as a delicacy in places like China, where they are often exported to. In fact, sea cucumber exports from Fiji amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Although the Fijian sea cucumber fishery has been fished for over 200 years, it has now come under serious threat from overfishing in recent years. For the time being, fishing for them with scuba diving gear has been banned until stocks recover. However, in 2016, free diving to harvest these unusual animals was an activity that Maika was well versed in. He would take a deep breath, submerge beneath the waves, and dive down to the ocean floor. Plucking the 30-centimeter long sea cucumbers from the sea floor and placing them in his mesh bag was something he did for 2 to 4 hours a day until he had enough to sell to a middleman at the market. From there, the sea cucumbers were boiled, dried, salted, and sold to a large company before being exported to Asia. On this particular occasion, he and his fishing companions spread out in the water, each one of them diving down to search for the sea cucumbers that littered the underwater ground. They fished near the mouth of the Yanaway River, where it flowed into the sea. The influx of fresh water provided nutrients for the marine life that lived nearby. The shallows were awash with wildlife. Marine algae attracted small fish, the small fish attracting bigger ones, and those attracting sharks. There are many different species of shark that frequent Fijian waters. These range from reef sharks to bull and tiger sharks. They scour the coastline and search for prey and even enter the rivers from the sea. As Maika filled his mesh bag, he had attracted unwanted attention. A shark was on the hunt nearby. It honed its senses on the fishermen. As the population of sea cucumbers has reduced, Fijian fishermen have to risk their lives diving in deeper and deeper water. Maika and the others, however, were in relatively shallow water near the reef. Maika was closest to the predator. It would have taken him completely by surprise. Its rapid speed, precise attack, and powerful jaws would have caused catastrophic damage to the fisherman in seconds. He wouldn't have time to cry out for help or fight back. The murkiness of the water, caused by the currents where the river met the sea, made spotting a predator approaching almost impossible. Minutes after the attack, when Maika had been killed almost instantly, his friends bobbed up to the surface. They had caught a fair amount of sea cucumbers and now swam to the shore to take stock of their catch and regroup. They looked around for Maika. He was nowhere to be seen. But as they scanned the water, they spotted something. It made their hearts leap, and a sense of dread came over them. There, bobbing in the water, was a body. Two of the men, Elisa Tuinawaria and Simone Ligavaki, who happened to be Maika's cousins, dived into the water. They made a rapid dash to the body. When they got there, they had the shock of their lives. It was definitely Maika, but in a gruesome reality, his head and left arm were missing, and he had huge bite marks taken from his thighs. His body floated vertically in the water, his feet still dangling beneath its surface. The men dragged him to shore, and in shock and terror, they wrapped his body up and drove him to Savu Savu Hospital. The doctors confirmed it was a shark attack and, at the time of the media report, were awaiting expert analysis to determine what species had been responsible. Maika had died doing something he loved. He had been with friends and family, but his life had been cut tragically short. The attack on the young family man sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. His wife, Asanati Kima, and children were obviously traumatized by the news. The police conducted an investigation and a search for Maika's remains ensued. Only his face mask was found.
Ever since he was a teenager, David Weir loved to dive in Australia's waters. He held a professional diving license for more than 10 years and was very experienced in the water. He was married with 2 children aged 13 and 3. He had worked as a deckhand on a crayfish boat and more recently had been offered a job as a professional diver. His target catch was abalone. These are large sea snails that attach themselves to rocks and reefs in warm coastal areas. During abalone season, which in Australia runs from November to April, David would regularly fish for them off Australia's west coast. David and his friends shared the use of the boat. They fitted it to the trailer and drove it down to the beach. They reversed the trailer onto the sand and backed the boat slowly into the water. 29-year-old David and 21-year-old Dave Lashman climbed into the boat. Dave pulled on the cord attached to the outboard engine and fired it up. They motored a kilometer from shore. Their destination was Honeymoon Island, which lies 40 kilometers east of Hopetown. This island is a small granite outcrop frequented by seals and sea lions. They used the island to sun themselves before entering the water to hunt and catch fish. Just off the coast, right whales were reported to be calving. The waters were a hive of activity, and they attracted some of the ocean's greatest predators. Great white sharks hunted the seals and sea lions. When whales were calving, the sharks were attracted by the blood in the water. They feasted on the afterbirth and any weak or lone calves. It was a dangerous time to be in the water. In fact, David was no stranger to sharks. Less than a month before, he and his friends had been chased out of the water by an enormous 5-meter great white shark. And only days before, another diver was chased by a large great white right in the same spot. But that didn't stop David from going back. He knew the dangers. He knew the risks. Easing the boat closer to the island, Dave held the boat steady whilst David climbed into his dive gear. He was hookah diving, the process by which a diver breathes through a line that is attached to the surface of the water. This way, they don't require any oxygen tanks on their backs. David also carried a pony bottle, a little bottle of oxygen with its own regulator. He clipped this to his harness for use in emergencies. He tugged on his full-length wetsuit and tied his weight belt around his waist. He had a mesh net attached to his belt and a knife in his hand. The water was 8 to 10 meters deep. David needed to dive to the bottom and scour the rocks for the abalone snails that clung to them in large numbers. Dave watched as his friend disappeared under the choppy surface. Seconds later, there was a swirl in the water. Dave watched in terror as he saw the huge tail fin of a shark thrash out of the water. The tail alone must have been about 2 meters across. Dave shouted to David under the water. He was frantic with worry. Then he saw a huge dorsal fin slice through the surface of the water like a knife through butter. There was more commotion in the water, a boiling and fizzing. Seconds later, the white bubbles turned red. Dave couldn't see what was happening under the water. David must have dived into the water just as the shark swam by. The attack occurred within a matter of seconds of David submerging below the surface. Frantically, Dave motored the boat right through the blood-stained water. As he did so, he grabbed hold of the hookah rig. He tugged the air supply hose. It was slack. There was no resistance. He kept pulling, hauling the line on board. Then he got to the end of it. Still attached was a shredded harness, and still attached to the harness was the little pony bottle and tooth marks. David was nowhere to be seen. Dave leaned over the side of the boat. He scoured the water, shouting desperately, but there was no sign of him or the shark. Then he saw something rising from the depths. He could just make out a shadow. Something moved towards the surface. To Dave's shock, David's body bobbed up the surface. He had been severely mauled and, tragically, he was clearly dead. Dave tried to grab his friend's body. He leaned right over the water, trying desperately to grab a hold of David's torso, but his hands kept slipping. Moments later, David's body sank. In utter shock and devastation, Dave sped back to the shore. The engine revved and roared as he tore over the waves. He ran the boat up onto the beach at Starvation Bay and quickly jumped onto the sand. He shouted to some fishermen nearby who came running over. When he told them what had happened, they all ran to their vehicle. They gave Dave a lift to Hopetown to report the incident to officials. The events of that terrible day, of course, still haunt those who knew and loved David. His friends have always spoken highly of him, of the exciting fishing career he was heading for, and of his young family he left behind. Regardless of the shark attacks that happen in Australia's waters, you never expect it to happen to you or a loved one. Having said that, David wasn't entirely eaten by the shark. He was savagely killed, and his body washed ashore 3 days later. It is likely, in this case, the shark realized the mistaken identity, but it was too late for David. There were definitely warning signs for the young father of two. Media reports stated that he had been pursued by a shark only 3 weeks before his fatal attack, and another diver only a few days before the incident. If these were true, then they served as a stern warning to David. There have been cases when shark attacks have been more common during high water turbidity, as the water is murky and both shark and human are less able to spot each other. On the day of the shark attack, the water was thick with kelp and underwater visibility was poor. All of these things suggest that it was a very dangerous dive that David was embarking on, and the fatality could have been avoided if the conditions or season had been different. Instead, David Weir, knowing the risks, went diving that day anyway, leading to his terrifying final affliction. Sultan Bathery, India is a place that's got an unusual mix of both the old and the new, ancient and modern. Cut into the wild jungle are patches of farmland, little towns bustling with people, and even temples built hundreds of years ago by ancestors that no one can name anymore. In one of these little patches lived Tabua Prajesh on his dairy farm. He'd inherited the business from his father, as his father did before him, and he liked his hard-working yet simple life very much. He was just far enough out of reach that the busy lives of the townspeople didn't bother him, and his quiet little family too much. Here was where Tabua woke up to the surrounding wilderness where he was born 36 years ago. He'd spent his childhood working on the farm and playing in the trees and the waterfalls within walking distance from his house, the same house that he was now raising his own children in. He woke up every morning to the sounds of the cows in the pen and the birds out in the wild. Every morning, he got into his Jeep and drove out to do the morning chores while his wife prepared breakfast. Then, at around noon, he returned for lunch before heading out to the very edge of the farm. And there he spent the next hour or two of his day cutting down grass for his cows. He loaded his Jeep until it nearly overflowed. The grass kept the cows occupied until the next morning, until he started the ritual all over again. It was the 9th of December, 2023, and Tabua went about his morning routine like he did every day before. His wife woke him with a cup of hot chai, and by the time she'd started cooking breakfast while nursing a fussy and teething baby, he was already starting up the Jeep. After the busy morning was behind him, he returned home for lunch and enjoyed a few minutes with his children, making the baby laugh and teaching his two older boys how to make slingshots out of some rubber cut from an old tire and a few good Y-shaped branches that he cut down for them. He left the boys to their target practice and set out in his trusty Jeep again to go and collect his herd's fodder. Tabua drove for 10 minutes before stopping right at the edge of the tree line, but something was already waiting for him. He didn't know it, but for the past 4 days, the farmer had been watched closely by a male Siberian tiger from inside the jungle. The observant cat noticed that the man had a system that he followed religiously. He'd cut grass, load the Jeep, and when he returned the next day, Tabua started cutting grass right next to the spot he'd last cut from. That way, he systematically cleared every square inch around his farm in increments, and by the time he'd come full circle, the place he'd started at had a fresh new patch of grass growing for his cows again. Every day that he returned, the cat was waiting in front of the section where he'd be working. Sure enough, like clockwork, Tabua arrived and cleared a few feet of growth with his scythe, right in front of the tiger watching from the trees. After clearing some growth, he sat down with his back to the trees and started making bundles that he tied with blades of grass before loading them into the back of his Jeep. The predator waited until the man placed the scythe on top of the vehicle. The animal wasn't stupid. It knew very well that this seemingly primitive tool was incredibly dangerous. If that long blade could slice through grass and bush as smoothly as it did, it would slice through a living animal too. So it waited patiently until the potential weapon was well out of the human's reach before it started to slink out of the bushes from where it was hiding. Tabua was whistling a nursery rhyme he'd learned as a boy, lost in his thoughts and the task at hand. All the while, the animal crept up closer and closer behind him. Its paws were silent as they sidestepped the sticks and leaves that littered the ground. Its shoulders were hunched, ready to pounce. With a final twitch of its tail, the beast let out a roar that sent the birds in the nearby trees into the air. Thottothil turned sharply at the sudden sound, and to his horror, the tiger was already right above him. Its extended claws were held wide, and its jaws were already open as it fell on top of him. Thottothil was pounded onto his back, and the pair of them skidded over the ground, leaving a groove in the earth as they went. The beast was aiming for his throat, but Thottothil turned around just as it landed on him, so its teeth sank into the man's face instead. Vicious and frenzied, the animal shook its prey. Thottothil screamed as his skin was torn from his skull. One of the tiger's claws was tearing through his back, and the other was hooked into the space between his shoulder and neck. Desperately, Thottothil clawed at the massive animal on top of him, but all his hands managed to get a hold of were clumps of orange and black fur. It wasn't the bite on his head that killed Thottothil. It was the single nail that managed to embed into his neck. The femoral artery was punctured, and he bled out, but not before the skin on his face was entirely ripped off the bone. When the man finally went limp, the tiger dragged him into the midst of the trees where it could eat in peace, with no fear of any more humans coming along to disturb it. Thottothil's wife knew something was wrong when night fell, and her husband hadn't returned for dinner. She didn't waste time trying to search for him in the dark. With 3 young children in tow, she called the authorities and every neighbor in the vicinity. The search party found the jeep almost immediately. The pool of blood on the ground next to a bundle of grass shimmered in their torchlights. From there, it didn't take them long to find Thottothil's remains just a few feet from the car. He'd been decapitated, and his left leg was gnawed off entirely. There were shreds of ginger and black hair embedded under his nails. For the next 3 days, while the Prajesh family prepared for his funeral, authorities tried to track the tiger. By the size of the paw prints, they were certain that they were looking for a fully grown male, but they just couldn't track where the beast went in the thick overgrowth of the jungle. But everyone in the area knows that once a tiger kills a human, it always comes back to bring more people to their terrifying final affliction. Kakadu National Park in North Australia is a protected park of sorts. People aren't allowed to hunt or farm in the area, but locals still go fishing and out for picnics without a guide or the need for a permit. The animals inside are protected by law, but it's still open for people to move in and out without hindrance. And for the most part, this has always worked out well. By encouraging the public to appreciate nature, they are incentivized to protect it, not to destroy. Through Kakadu runs Crocodile River, named after, you guessed it, the huge amounts of saltwater crocodiles that infest the waters. The crocodiles in that river are one of the few success stories of nature conservation. By the middle of the 19th century, they were critically endangered, and in just 20 years, they were brought back from the brink, a victory that the locals are fiercely proud of. It's a popular spot for visitors to take pictures and to view the fearsome creatures in their natural habitats. The locals make a game of giving the oldest crocs names and pointing them out to day tourists. In the years, people have petitioned to put a bridge over Crocodile River, but authorities deemed it a waste of money. Before you judge them too harshly, they actually had a point. Locals ride their dirt bikes and fish in those waters every day, and despite the numerous signs put up to warn them of the dangers in the current, they walk around in the shallows as they cast their lines in for fish, sometimes even taking a swim to cool off from the midday heat. Say what you want about the Aussies, they're tough as nails. You don't grow up in the land down under, where every other thing wants to kill you, without growing hair on your teeth. A bridge would have been a waste of taxpayers' money, since no one would have used it anyway. There were more than enough warnings, and everyone knew what they were walking into if they really wanted to. Kakadu holds another title, other than just being one of the biggest crocodile populations in the country. It's also where the movie Crocodile Dundee was filmed all those years ago. But in March 1987, it would become famous for something other than being the grounds for one of the best Aussie cinematic gems to grace our screens. It became the scene of one of the most brutal attacks in the river's history, and one that still haunts the witnesses to this day. On that day, Carrie McLaughlin took his son out for some father-son fishing. Their parked car at the picnic area was soon joined by another vehicle containing 6 American tourists. When they saw the two fishing, one of the visitors, Everett Galbraith, took a few snapshots of the pair. Everett and Carrie struck up a short conversation because Everett thought the pictures of the father and son were so sweet that he wanted to post them to Carrie once Everett got back to the States and they were developed. Carrie's open and friendly nature made it easy to like him immediately. A miner by trade, Carrie was hard and tough on the outside, but an absolute hoot to strike up a conversation with. And his preteen son was just as open and naturally funny. They were a charming pair, and they introduced the Americans to Eric, the biggest croc in the water. Carrie pointed a 3.5-meter-long beast lying on the riverbank out to Everett, telling him how the lizard was a favorite of the locals, just because it was such a big specimen. Carrie even warned the group to keep back from the water's edge, noting that the reptiles were just as fast on land as they were in the water. They ended their conversation so that Carrie and his boy could get back to catching a few more swimmers for the day. But Carrie wasn't having much luck, so he decided to try on the opposite bank instead. On that side, there was a clump of reeds, and he knew by now that his catch liked to hide amongst the grasses that grew right out of the water. Despite his own warnings to the tourists to be careful of getting too close to the water, Carrie stepped right into the current himself. It was just a few feet to get to the other side, and at its deepest point, the water reached up to the 40-year-old's chest. Carrie's son was right behind him, their poles resting on their shoulders as they waded through. Everett spied Eric on the far side of the river. The crocodile was no longer sunning itself on the sandy bank. It had slipped into the shallows the moment that Carrie stepped in. Everett yelled for Carrie to keep an eye out for the crocodile ahead of him, but Eric just waved him off at the same time that his foot slipped on the muddy bottom. Carrie came up spluttering and gagging on the mucky water. His son was about to make a jibe at his father's banana feet, but the laughter went cold on the boy's lips. The lad saw the creature strike from the far bank, slithering its snake-like body toward where Carrie went down. Everett saw it too, and he began to yell for them to turn back. Carrie might have been a daredevil and a joker, but even he realized the impending danger streaking toward him. Pushing his son ahead, the two began to swim as hard as they could, back the way they'd come. Carrie made sure that his boy stayed ahead of him, but he'd lost sight of the beast. It had gone down low, beneath the brown water. When they reached the bank, the face of the loamy wall was too high to simply wade out on. They would have to climb it. The young man began scaling the steep wall, with his father boosting his feet up from below. Just as the boy scuttled onto dry land, turning to grab his father's hand to pull him up too, the boy finally sighted Eric. The animal came out of the water like a cannon, and Carrie reacted instinctively, throwing himself away from the approaching predator and into a drifting log that was floating close by. The croc missed him by just a few inches. Carrie grabbed the log and jammed it at the animal that was approaching again as the rocks from above began raining down. His son was pelting missiles at the creature. It was the only thing the boy could do while the tourists stood watching several yards away in open-mouthed horror. The crocodile dipped below the water again, and when it came up, it was right in Carrie's face. The last thing that Carrie saw was the gigantic maw, full of razor-sharp teeth, and the pink lining of its throat. Then everything went dark. The crowd and Carrie's terrified son watched as the crocodile bit Carrie's head clean off his shoulders. Everett had reached the boy, grabbed him by the shoulders, and dragged him away from the shore. And a good thing, too. The boy, in his panicked state, was about to jump right back into the river to save his father. The group had to drive 5 minutes to the nearest phone, located at a gift shop, to phone the authorities. Within 20 minutes, the authorities were there, but the rest of Carrie's body was nowhere to be seen, nor was the crocodile that had killed him. It didn't take them long to locate it, however. Lying on another stretch of sand, it had dragged Carrie's corpse out and was getting ready to feed. One of the officers fired a round, causing Eric to drop Carrie's body and flee back into the river. But no one knows whether or not that round killed it. The crocodile's body never surfaced. It might have been eaten by other crocs, or it's still out there somewhere. Saltwater crocodiles can live for almost 100 years after all, so there is a very real possibility that Eric is still lurking the murky waters, waiting to bring another innocent swimmer to their terrifying final affliction. As the war in Ukraine raged, 23-year-old Russian Vladimir Popov decided to leave his home country of Russia. He wanted to avoid compulsory conscription into the armed forces. It was not the life he wanted for himself, and his father, Yuri, didn't want his son to risk his life fighting in battle. Because of this, the two of them moved to Egypt. They left behind Vladimir's mother, who remained at the family home in Balashika, near Moscow, and Vladimir's girlfriend, Anastasia. They headed to Egypt's Red Sea coast. They were finding their feet, enjoying the quiet life. Vladimir found work online as an IT consultant. It was the perfect way to work remotely from the comfort of his own home. The arrangement seemed to be working for the young man and his father, but it wouldn't be long before tragedy would strike. On the 8th of June 2023, just months after moving to Egypt, Yuri and Vladimir walked down to the sea next to Dream Beach Hotel at the Egyptian resort of Hurghada. This picturesque town stretches for almost 30 miles along the Red Sea coastline. The location is stunning. White and golden sandy beaches line the turquoise waters. Luxury yachts and motorboats moor up just offshore, and holidaymakers soak up the sun from the comfort of their sunbeds. Vladimir thought he had struck gold by moving to such a beautiful location. He entered the water that fateful day, heading out for a swim that was to be his last. The calm sea was inviting, the air temperature warm and the water cool. Vladimir swam outwards from the beach in the safe swimming zone. Several other bathers were enjoying the water at the same time. Then there was a shout. Someone had seen something. Everyone's worst nightmare was coming true. Something that we all think about when we enter the water. The clear image of a dorsal fin breaking through the surface. Everyone made a mad dash for the beach. But as Vladimir turned to swim back to shore, he felt a sharp tug on his leg and let out a cry in pain. What followed was a devastating and truly shocking attack. Not often is an animal attack witnessed by hundreds just meters from the victim, but that's exactly what happened to Vladimir. As people heard Vladimir's cries, they stood up from their seats and looked out across the water. Just 20 feet from the beach, Vladimir was being thrashed around by a huge shark. As he was briefly let go, people could see the terrifying dorsal fin circling the young man. Then he was dragged underwater. He fought back, though. He could be seen trying to push the shark away from him, but it was too agile, too quick. It was too powerful. There was a crashing and a bubbling, a boiling of the water as Vladimir was dragged out of sight. The large gray body of the shark arched out of the water. Vladimir's legs were seen kicking in the air above the surface as he was tumbled and turned upside down. He was spun in circles like a washing machine. Then he resurfaced again. Dizzied and disoriented, Vladimir began to make a few strokes towards the shore. How terrified he must have felt, not being able to see the shark, knowing it was somewhere below him, knowing that it was likely coming back for more, circling around his legs before coming in for the kill. The beach was tantalizingly close. He was surrounded in a cloud of red, his own blood pouring into the Red Sea. He made a few anxious strokes forwards. People could see the nervousness in his body language. They could see he wasn't sure what to do, which way to turn. Vladimir could see his father on dry land. He could see the crowd of people that had gathered at the water's edge, but no one was coming for him. "Papa," he cried out, "help me." But there was nothing his father could do. A rescue boat was launched by lifeguards as soon as the attack unfolded. They motored towards Vladimir as he bobbed in the water for a few heart-stopping seconds. Then the shadow of the enormous shark emerged beneath him once more. It hadn't finished with him yet. Its jaws opened wide as it came up from below. It grabbed Vladimir again, this time around his torso, and dived deep underwater with the young Russian in its jaws. Witnesses reported seeing Vladimir's limp and lifeless body resurface again and again as the shark continued to consume him. Over the next 2 hours, the shark tormented the crowd, pulling and tugging at Vladimir's body. It was truly a nightmare for everyone involved. A lifeguard by the name of Muhammad reportedly swam towards Vladimir and another tourist in the water during the attack. He could see the water surrounding Vladimir was full of blood. He could see how torn up Vladimir was. As he had raised an arm, Muhammad saw the man's hand was missing. He almost dropped the body back into the sea when he noticed the shark had torn his head off. The shark also ripped apart the man's chest. Huge bites were missing from the abdomen as well. It was the most horrifying sight he has ever seen. It was clear Vladimir had already passed away, so instead, he focused his attention on a tourist woman who was swimming close to Vladimir. She was in a state of shock, barely able to move. Muhammad grabbed her under the arms and pulled her back to the shore. There she was comforted and tended to by beachgoers. When the shark had had its fill, authorities were able to capture it. They dragged long nets out behind speedboats and circled the shark. It became trapped and was pulled to shore. It was an enormous tiger shark, measuring 10 feet long. Its distinctive markings were visible across its powerful body. As it was pulled onto the sand, its fate was now sealed. A crowd gathered around to see what a killer shark looks like. Then they began beating it, holding metal bars and wooden sticks. Men began hitting the shark repeatedly across its head and face. The shark attempted to get away, its body powerless on dry land. It flapped its tail and writhed around, desperate for water. After both brutal deaths, the tiger shark was opened up. Inside her stomach were some of Vladimir's remains. It was a gruesome discovery. Vladimir's head and several other body parts were inside the belly. But another discovery may have explained her aggressive behavior and the reason for the devastating attack. Inside her were baby sharks. Tiger sharks lay eggs internally, which then hatch inside the mother. The babies survive inside her until they are ready to be born around 16 months later. Marine expert and fellow Russian Dmitry Orlov came to his own conclusion about what happened and why the shark attacked Vladimir. He believed that being so large and heavily overloaded, her typical prey may have been too quick for her. It was far easier for her to hunt humans who were relatively slow and defenseless in the water. However, biologically and ecologically, this doesn't seem to make sense. But Dmitry believed that his tiger shark was no stranger to human flesh. The year before Vladimir's death, a tiger shark attacked 2 female tourists, an Austrian and a Romanian, in the same location. Other experts have claimed that the shark's behavior may have been influenced by the rising sea temperatures of the Red Sea. She could have been migrating to the Gulf of Suez and cooler waters. Following the attack, Yuri spoke of his son's death. He held no grudge against the Egyptian government and remarkably said that it was tragically Vladimir's destiny to be eaten by the shark. An unusual comment, but one that likely made dealing with his son's death easier to handle. Back in Russia, Vladimir's mother learned of the terrible events. Her son had moved to Egypt to avoid a premature death. He had his whole life ahead of him, and now his mother's world came crashing down. After the forensic examination of Vladimir's body and his remains, Yuri was given permission to cremate him and return the ashes to his homeland of Russia, Vladimir's final resting place. As for the shark, authorities wanted the huge specimen preserved. Perhaps it could serve as some form of education for visiting tourists and locals alike. A team of 5 embalming experts took on the task of mummifying the shark so that it could be put on display in the local museum. The Red Sea has been plagued by shark attacks over the decades. Maybe now it is time to do something about them, as overfishing is removing sharks' prey sources such as large fish like tuna. They turn to other potential prey to satiate their appetite. Moving closer to shore, these incredible predators are more likely to attack again than ever before. Perhaps the Red Sea resorts should install shark nets to protect bathers, a tactic that has proved effective in other parts of the world. Following Vladimir's attack, the beaches were closed. The sea emptied as tourists left the resorts. But a couple of days later, the local government deemed the waters safe again. Speedboats and safety divers maintained a presence along the coastline to reassure visitors and to continue to scout for any potential dangers. But how long will it be before people forget about this tragic event? How long will it be before disaster strikes again, before another innocent swimmer meets their terrifying final affliction? What do you like to do when you go to the beach? Do you like to relax on the golden sand? Maybe you like to read a book or go paddling in the sea. Well, for some people, diving is their passion. Swimming amongst the different types of marine wildlife and exploring old wrecks that have sunk below the waves can be really exciting, but also really dangerous, as this one man found out in today's story. Manuel Lopez had lived on the coast of Mexico his entire life. He was proud of where he lived and his heritage that came with his place of birth. The 56-year-old man loved his home and wouldn't trade it for the world. However, his life wasn't necessarily an easy one. Taking advantage of where he lived, Manuel learned from an early age how to dive for the mollusks that lived on the bottom of the ocean floor. His father, who was a fisherman himself, taught Manuel just how important fishing was and how it could earn him a livelihood if it was done right. Manuel took all of his father's teachings to heart, and over the years, he practiced fishing and diving for mollusks until he was able to do both quite expertly. What he really loved was diving into the ocean in search of scallops, mussels, and all sorts of other shellfish. He found the thrill of diving down into the water exciting. He never knew what he might find or what kind of animals he might come across. Of course, as the years went by, Manuel also learned of the dangers that diving for shellfish could bring. Strong riptides could take him out to sea, where he could potentially end up getting lost. Murky waters could also bring danger, as Manuel could get lost in the silt and not know which direction to go in order to get back to safety. But the most dangerous thing of all were the predatory animals that lurked in the water: sharks. Mexico is home to a diverse range of shark species, with nearly 100 different types found in its waters. The Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea are particularly important areas for these animals, as they serve as breeding and feeding grounds for many species. There are some species of shark which live on the Mexican coast that are fairly calm and non-aggressive towards humans. These are the whale shark, the largest shark in the world, hence its name, and the nurse shark is also relatively harmless to humans, often dwelling on the bottom of the ocean in shallow waters to hunt for small fish. However, it is the more aggressive sharks that people need to worry about. Species such as the bull shark, which are actually responsible for most of the attacks in Mexico, the hammerhead sharks, and the one that many people find the scariest of all, the great white shark. Whilst common media has made them out to be more vindictive than they actually are, considering they are just animals acting on instinct, great whites are still a shark that nobody should mess with, as they are incredibly dangerous. However, sometimes circumstances push people to do things that might not necessarily be the wisest decision at the time. This is, unfortunately, what happened to Manuel. It was February 2023, coming into Mexico's springtime, and Manuel and his fellow fishermen were all busy, trying to collect as many mollusks and fish as possible so that they could sell them to local restaurants to earn a wage. However, there had been reports of quite a few sharks migrating into the waters around the coast so that they could hunt for fish and give birth to their young. Because of the number of sharks that were being reported in the area, including great whites, the fishermen, and especially the divers, were warned not to enter the ocean, as they could potentially be putting themselves at risk. For a little while, Manuel and his fellow fishermen stayed out of the ocean, as they didn't want to risk their lives. In times where people like Manuel can't work, the Mexican government gives out a stipend of 7,200 pesos, which is roughly $400 per year. However, this is not a lot to live off of, especially if the fishermen have a family to support. As the days passed by, there quickly became a shortage of seafood in the area, which meant that demand for the items were at an all-time high. Manuel found himself being drawn to the ocean to go diving for shellfish again, as he knew he could get a good price for his catch, and he needed the money to help support his family. Finally, deciding that he would rather take the risk to try and get a bit more money, Manuel put on his diving suit, a full gray suit, and went diving near San Jose Beach in Tabua Bay. He didn't have any diving equipment, preferring to hold his breath as he dived down to a depth of around 59 feet so that he could collect axe tripe, a mollusk which is like a scallop, from the ocean floor. It was a shellfish which Manuel had collected multiple times before, and he knew where to look to get the best fish. Despite the dangers, things were going well for Manuel for a little while. The diver was collecting the shellfish at quite a fast rate, and he was looking forward to the large amount of money he would hopefully be getting after he had sold all of his catch. Jose Bernal was another fisherman who was out with Manuel at the time. He was diving into the water from the boat that they had brought along and was collecting the mollusks as well. He had decided to get out of the water for a little while so that he could rest. However, Manuel felt that he was finding quite a lot of axe tripe, and he didn't want to lose the spot where he was finding all of the shellfish. It was whilst Manuel was diving to the ocean floor, though, that something happened that no one could have expected. As he was relaxing on the boat, Jose noticed an odd shape in the water. At first, the fisherman couldn't make out what the shape was, but as it got closer, Jose quickly felt panic taking a hold of him. He knew that the massive shape, which looked to be around 19 feet long, could only possibly be one thing: a shark. After coming to this conclusion, Jose's terror increased tenfold. He had no clue how he was supposed to alert Manuel to the danger, as he was still underwater, and Jose did not want to get back into the water with the dangerous shark nearby. The fisherman could only hope that Manuel wouldn't attract the shark's attention, and that it would simply swim on by. But that wasn't the case. Manuel, not having a clue what was happening or what was coming close to him, was quickly running out of air. Deciding that he needed to go back to the surface for air, Manuel began swimming up, taking his haul with him. However, in just one moment, everything changed for the worse. In one moment, Manuel was swimming happily, and then in the next moment, the massive great white shark came swimming out of the murky water, bursting through the water at 35 miles per hour, and in just one bite, the shark separated Manuel's head and part of his shoulders from his body. Jose had witnessed the entire event, and he could not believe what he had just seen. There was nothing that he could do for Manuel, as he was most certainly not alive anymore. With nothing else to do, Jose returned to the mainland, where he informed the proper authorities about what had happened. But why did the shark go after Manuel? Well, whilst great whites do attack up to 5 to 10 humans every year, they usually only take an experimental bite before moving on, as they are not actually that interested in hunting people. Instead, the great white's usual prey consists of seals, sea lions, dolphins, and turtles. However, every now and then they can get confused due to how people look in the water when they are swimming. Thinking that it was a source of food, the shark will attack the person, which could lead to some very serious injuries, or, in the worst case scenario, a fatality. This is sadly the most likely thing that happened to Manuel. The fisherman was most likely just unlucky to be in the water at the same time as the massive shark was swimming nearby. And whilst it wasn't necessarily anybody's fault what had happened to Manuel, it is important to remember that the ocean is the home of animals like sharks, and that it is always better to play it safe than to risk a life to dive into the ocean when these incredible creatures are nearby. Sadly, all that could be done for Manuel after the incident was to try and collect the body from the water, and then, once that was done, bury him in a proper grave. Fishermen spotted a shark off the coast of the western Mexico coastal town of Paredon, Colorado, 2 weeks after Manuel Lopez was attacked and killed by a shark while fishing for mollusks. This shark is thought to be the one responsible for decapitating Manuel. It has been spotted several times since the fatal attack, and authorities have been unable to kill it. This massive man-eating shark is still on the loose in the waters around Mexico, waiting to bring another innocent diver like Manuel Lopez to their terrifying final affliction. The Chilean abalone, popularly known as locos, is a species of large edible sea snail native to the Pacific coastlines of Chile and Peru. Locos are renowned for their delectable flavor and tender meat, making them a prized culinary delicacy. Fishermen relish the opportunity to gather locos, mainly to supply local markets and restaurants with these savory delights. They venture into the vast Pacific and explore its rocky shores, tide pools, and submerged crevices in search of these prized gastropods. However, not all fishermen emerge victorious, as occasionally formidable predators from deep beneath turn the ocean into a deadly battleground while patrolling their watery domain. It was January the 5th, 1980, a serene and overcast Saturday morning, when Jose Lorenas Miranda embarked on his fishing expedition in the southern Pacific Ocean at Punta Negra. Clad in a sleek black neoprene wetsuit, he resembled a mysterious figure blending seamlessly with the maritime environment. As he and his crew stepped onto a sturdy 7-meter wooden boat, it creaked softly under their weight, echoing the anticipation in the air. With a sense of purpose, they steered the boat further into the sea and ventured away from the familiar coastline. A few meters from shore, they anchored the boat and got to work. With unwavering focus, Jose tightened the grip on his inline accumulator tank and tools. In his left hand, he carried a sturdy collecting bag, its open jaws eagerly awaiting the bountiful marine wonders that he would discover. In his right hand, a trusty pry bar dangled from his grip, poised to assist in the careful extraction of the elusive locos hidden beneath the rocks. Standing on the edge of the boat, Jose inhaled deeply and, with a leap, broke the surface tension and plunged into the embrace of the aquatic realm. Underwater, a new world unfurled. He navigated through shimmering curtains of sunlight, revealing a symphony of colors beneath the depths. Schools of fish darted gracefully, their scales glistening like precious gems. With each stroke, he moved deeper, exploring rocky crevices and sandy beds. For the next 35 minutes, Jose went on collecting locos, occasionally utilizing the pry bar to spear curious fish that swam too close. However, as Jose surveyed his spoils, a flicker of dissatisfaction crossed his face. Though his new catch was impressive, it did not yet match the image of abundance he held in his mind. A relentless thirst for more gnawed at his determination, driving him to seek greater fulfillment. Resurfacing in disappointment, he climbed back aboard the boat and together with the crew set sail once more, guided by an unwavering belief that there was yet another haven just beyond the horizon, where an extraordinary catch awaited them. Guided by instinct and experience, the crew found a new hunting ground which was 20 meters from shore. They anchored the boat in the midst of an underwater oasis, which unfortunately was also within 150 meters of a sea lion hollout. His crew and fellow fishermen, whose boats peppered across the seascape, observed with curiosity as Jose donned his gear and prepared to dive into the unknown. After swimming 5 meters from the vessel, he angled his body obliquely and began his descent to the deep. However, a minute into his voyage to the seafloor, Jose's peaceful dive was shattered by a sudden surge of violence. Jose turned to his left, only to be met by the open mouth of an ancient predator whose sleek form had silently sliced through the calm water, a massive great white shark. He instinctively raised his left hand to shield himself from the onslaught of the relentless shark, who clearly wanted to eat him. But fate had cruel intentions, and the shark's voracity could not be stopped. A clash of wills ensued, a life and death struggle in the watery realm. In a gruesome display of violence, the predator's jaws clamped, enclosing Jose's left arm and head within its mouth. Its razor-sharp teeth tore through his flesh, tearing chunks of his upper torso and left arm away. In the midst of the struggle, the predator sank its teeth into Jose's inline accumulator tank, but it was unable to puncture it. The shark clamped down with more and more pressure until suddenly the tank gave in and exploded. His crew and the other fishermen watched from their boats as a gory mess of red bubbles began to ascend from the depths. At that chilling moment, they watched as the head of a colossal shark broke the water surface, revealing its presence a mere 3 meters from Jose's boat. The scene that unfolded before the horrified onlookers was nothing short of a nightmare. Dangling eerily from the beast's menacing jaws hung the remnants of Jose's decapitated upper torso, left arm, and shoulder, which were connected only by a fragment of his shredded wetsuit. In that grim moment, time seemed to stand still as the fishermen grappled with the shock and horror that enveloped them. The air grew heavy with an indescribable mix of disbelief, anguish, and primal fear. With a sense of urgency and determination, nearby boats swiftly converged upon the harrowing scene as the relentless shark continued its menacing dance, circling the lifeless body and periodically mouthing it as a grim display of dominance. The motormen aboard the approaching vessels, driven by a mix of instinct and courage, unleashed the roaring power of their motors in a desperate attempt to deter the predator. The group of revving engines echoed across the water, creating an act of defiance in the face of primal terror. Their efforts yielded partial success as the shark momentarily veered away, providing a narrow window for the crew aboard Jose's boat to recover the mangled body. They grappled with the weight of their fallen comrade. However, the shark's insatiable hunger could not be quelled. It seized an opportune moment and lunged once again, this time targeting the body's right arm in a desperate attempt to reclaim its prize. But it didn't stop there. The shark swam about 15 meters from the boat and, in a heart-stopping spectacle, surged forward and tried to ram the boat at high speeds, its head thrust out of the water with its menacing jaws agape. The boat quivered under the immense force, twisting it with a powerful force that turned it 90 degrees, a testament to the raw strength of the predator and its willingness to protect its kill. Desperate to evade the relentless predator, the boatman frantically ignited the motor, hoping to steer the vessel to safety. But once again, with astonishing force, the shark launched a series of violent thrusts, ramming the prow of the boat with its formidable head. The impact reverberated through the vessel, threatening to shatter the thin barrier between life of the crew and the abyss below. The crew on board held their breaths as their bodies trembled from the ordeal. The shark's snout was even with the prow of the boat, and its tail was seen to extend about a meter beyond the stern. Its width matched that of the boat, showing just how big it was. As the boat's engine purred to life, the boatman skillfully guided the vessel towards shallower waters in a last-ditch effort to outmaneuver their relentless pursuer. But glancing over their shoulders, the shark was still in hot pursuit. Fortunately, its relentless pursuit led it into treacherous, shallow depths. And there, in a moment of defeat, the predator's voracious journey came to an unexpected end as its massive form became grounded, its predatory prowess foiled by the changing tides. In a surge of collective relief, the crew seized the opportunity and their chance for survival and hastily abandoned their vessel before the shark could free itself. Just as the last crew member had safely made it out of the water onto land, the shark had thrashed its way back into deeper water and disappeared. An autopsy on Jose's body at the Los Vilos Hospital on January 9, 1980, showed decapitation at the 7th cervical vertebra, including amputation of the shoulder and left arm. The clavicle had been torn off, as was part of the scapula, and no shark tooth fragments were recovered. It was estimated that the great white shark responsible for the fatal attack on Jose Lorenas Miranda was more than 7 meters long, which would make this shark one of the biggest recorded great whites in the world. His attack is a reminder that as much as the expanse oceans yield immeasurable treasures, they too yield perils in equal measure. Shark attacks like these are what truly give sharks such a feared reputation. A shark attack so brutal is hard to write off as an attack based on false identity. The shark knew what it was hunting and seemed to enjoy the taste. Sadly, for Jose Miranda, he was one of the few who came face to face with one of the most ferocious predators in the ocean. his final moments looking into the shark's jaws before meeting his terrifying final affliction.